First on Radio 4, what happens when you bring a knowledge of harmony, counterpoint and orchestration to madcap comedy? Find out in Waaaaah, 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 the comedy scores.
Hello, my name is Huw Williams and I'm a musician, and this programme is about music. But what kind of music? Here's a clue. And here's another clue. Whoops, sorry about that. Come with me to a world of slide trombones, twittering flutes and raspberry-blowing tubas, when the music told you you were about to listen to or watch a comedy. When your trousers fell down, you heard this. And if you fell on your backside, you got this. What was it like to write this music? Was it hard? And how long did it need to be? Ooh, missus. And where did music like this come from? I'm going to find out. Follow me. That was music by Eric Rodgers from Carry On Up the Khyber. Music tailor-made for Charles Hawtrey's Silly Walk, perfectly linked to the action. But before the era of talkies, things were a bit more hit and miss.
In those days, you had to just forget there was going to be music. All the comedy had to be visual, because then once the film got in front of an audience, who knew what that audience were going to hear?
Silent movie pianist and composer Neil Brand. Writing film music isn't exactly easy nowadays, but the old silent cinema pianists had an even tougher time. I mean, the best they had to work with was a cue sheet, usually sent out by the film companies, and suggesting a mood or a piece of classical music. But some directors were just plain fussy.
Someone like Charlie Chaplin, of course, scored his own comedies, and there you do have features with Chaplin's music behind. And what Chaplin considers funny music is really interesting because it's mostly dance music. And so he doesn't make the music fit to the action. He has the music really sort of move along behind the action to give a continuous sense of sort of movement and laughter. But otherwise, it's not what we would think of as a comedy score. There was a score put together for the Gold Rush, for instance, which was mostly made up of pieces of music people would already know. One of the things, for instance, is the famous dance with the rolls and the forks that he does in the Gold Rush. What the cue sheet that I saw gave for that was actually the keel row. So if you can picture Chaplin with his rolls and his forks doing this little lovely little dance, what he wanted was
Do you know, I forgot about that. But even I'm just thinking it now in my mind with the forks and the rolls. I'm playing that. That really is suddenly very funny.
Yeah.
Once sound could be linked to pictures, directors could finally control what music we heard. They no longer had to rely on the talents of a local pianist, which was pretty important for Scott Bradley, composing for cartoons at Warner Studios.
What I think is most influential about the way that the music was shaped in later years was the way it was used with animation, with early animation. And there you're talking about people like Disney and, for instance, the Tom and Jerry cartoons, in which comedy music is very much what we call Mickey Mousing. In other words, it's absolutely hooked to the actions that you're watching on screen. So with a Tom and Jerry cartoon, if Tom comes running down a flight of stairs, hits a wall and turns into a concertina, you will actually get... And that is the concertina sound, you know. I doubt if that came out of silent cinema. I think that is probably much too complex and close to the action for silent cinema to have come up with that sort of thing. However, you had ragtime through the teens and you had jazz. Although possibly what was assumed from silent cinema was that you would get classical music to go with classical films, if you had comedies or whatever, you would have that kind of rhythm. You'd have jazz, you'd have ragtime. Ragtime particularly makes total sense when you apply it to somebody like Laurel and Hardy. Stan and Ollie sitting in a car going down a road to sell Christmas trees in the middle of the summer is perfect with something very slow like... Back it comes again.
Why am I laughing? You're just playing a piano. Because I've seen his Laurel and Hardy films, and a lot of their comedy was quite subtle. It was quite slow, isn't it?
Okay. When Laurel and Hardy came to make their sound films, the guy who did the music for them was a genius called Leroy Shield, who scored all of the Hal Roach movies. And I see him as like the kind of third in the Laurel and Hardy team, like the fifth Beatle. He came up with these wonderful, very, very funny pieces of music. I mean, the famous one being the Cuckoo Song, you know. But then, if you have a moment where Ollie is sitting in the wreckage of a fireplace, having had the entire chimney collapse on him, and he's still covered in bricks and soot.
Yeah.
What Leroy Shield wrote for that was this sort of... And with that, it's this kind of climbing sound of I think it's probably clarinet. So it's like the beginning of Rhapsody in Blue. And it really does sort of sound like a howl of anguish, albeit from someone who has brought it on themselves. And that kind of music, I think, that's grown out of a knowledge of jazz and rhythmic music. It's funny, but it also lifts you up.
Lift you up? Knowledge of jazz, harmony, rhythm? What? To write this?
I'm in love with an old trombone.
Angela Morley needed all those skills to write for Spike Milligan and The Goon Show.
Well, Spike made his needs very plainly known. I mean, he described in the script every week how he wanted it to be. And then, of course, when we got to rehearsal, Spike would sometimes say, no, it sounds too good. I know in one show there had to be a national anthem for some Ruritanian sort of country in Middle Europe, you know. And I composed this national anthem. Then when Spike heard it, he said, no, that sounds much too good. He said, I just want to hear one instrument at a time. So it sort of kind of started with piccolo, and then it went to trombone, and then it went to violin or something. And he was absolutely right. It sounded fantastic. I'd like to think I composed it that way, you see.
What a beautiful tune. Has anyone said it in music?
The benefits of a musical education. Angela's skill was in demand again during the 1950s. This time with TV comedy and Hancock's Half Hour.
I only met Hancock once, and that was after the show started. And, of course, after I'd written the theme, you see. So it was Dennis Mayne Wilson, the producer, who used to come over to me and tell me about this man called Hancock. And he asked me to write this theme, and he did an impersonation of Tony Hancock.
Composers like Angela Morley seem to have the knack of capturing characters through music. A tuba conveyed pompous Hancock. A bit of trombone could convey Harry Worth clowning around by a window. And a bit of mischief on the xylophone gave you...
Here is Jimmy Clitheroe as the Clitheroe Kid.
And it wasn't beneath the dignity of classical composers to have a go at comedy music. The music that goes with Flash Harry the Spiv in The Bells of St. Trinian's, composed by a man who'd go on to write symphonies and gain a knighthood, Sir Malcolm Arnold. What I like about this music is that it conveys character as well as drama, and few people did that better than Ron Goodwin. Here's the scene. An elderly lady with 5 double chins, dressed in tweed and wearing a felt hat, spots a woman being strangled on a train. Laugh? I never thought I'd stop. Only the old woman who sees all this is Margaret Rutherford, playing a comic version of Agatha Christie's Miss Marple. The music is by Ron Goodwin. Don't be fooled that this is an easy tune to hum. It doesn't mean it's easy music to write. Ron Shillingford was Ron Goodwin's assistant for 20 years, so he should know.
Ron was a total perfectionist. There were very few scores that he was ever happy with. Obviously, at some point, he would have to close the page and say, yes, that's fine, but he was a total perfectionist.
And do you know anything about his writing method? Did he ever talk to you about that?
Some things came easy to him, some things didn't. Obviously, on the film comedy side, he would see the film. Sometimes the directors would help, sometimes they wouldn't.
So would he see the film first before you wrote a score for it?
Yes, he would normally see the film first. Sometimes he would see the script first, which would give him a clue of what the film was about. Obviously, see the film at the spotting sessions.
Spotting sessions?
To go through the film, and if the director wanted anything highlighted in the film,
right,
you then have detailed cue sheets to the frame.
Here's Ron Goodwin himself talking about how he did it.
Actually, I think they're some of my favourite scores, you know, particularly one called Murder Most Foul. They were done with a fairly small orchestra, you know, a small string section, a harpsichord and a couple of flutes and a couple of horns or something like that, you know. But Lawrence Bachman was quite a creative guy in his own way. I mean, he wasn't the sort of usual front office type. He contributed a lot to those films, really. I remember him saying to me that he wanted it to be music that would fit a character who was an old-fashioned type, but who was also with it and ahead, you know, sort of thing. And so, I mean, it seemed fairly obvious to me to have a sort of gavotish type of tune with what was then a modern rhythm section supporting it.
In those days, he would normally have 6 weeks to write the music. And depending on how quickly he got on with it, that would soon filter down to perhaps 2 or 3 weeks.
Because when I listened to his music and the themes that he wrote, you know, it's not just the wonderful tunes that he came up with. It seemed to me that when he wrote music for films, he also came up with a good tune, and then the underscoring of the film.
You often get the underscore has an element of the main theme. So you get that motive running through the whole film.
So you had part of the main theme being used in the middle of the film. Now, the main theme would have been the tune, you know, the melody line of the tune that you... Look, here's Neil Brand. He can explain it far better than me.
Ron Goodwin is one of these people who was a composer, musical director who had a complete grasp of what music could do in any form. Miss Marple... It's funnier because it's on harpsichord than on piano, but when she's going upstairs, it would normally be a slowed-up version of her own theme. But being Ron Goodwin, he puts a great big 60s chord in the next one. And you can see her peering round corners.
Yeah.
And it's very much of its time. It's not her time, it's the 60s, it's the time of the film.
Yeah.
And it makes young people, for instance, go, wow, this is actually quite a cool old lady.
Now, there's got to be a link somewhere between old ladies and carry-on films. But to be honest, I can't think of one. Writing comedy can be hard work, but when you have to write the funny music to go with it, that can be even tougher. To me, it sounds complex, because you have to make all those sounds fit the action.
Matron, what can I do for you?
This is one of the things that the carry-on music used to do, was that it would Mickey Mouse action very often. Okay, you wouldn't by any means call it great music. Most of the carry-on themes, as I remember, started off with, oh dear, what can the matter be? Speed it up. three old ladies locked in the lavatory. You know, that's where we are in terms of the music for the opening of the film. But then you get an awful lot of this kind of Tom and Jerry sort of music in it.
And fling and in, and fling and in, and fling. Matron, take them away.
When you have to start thinking what is comic in terms of the whole sort of jigsaw of an orchestra, that is a tough gig. And I do think that particularly the musical directors of the 40s and 50s and 60s were geniuses. I mean, you're talking someone like Eric Rodgers, who was one of the main composers and musical directors for the Carry On films. That would just be bread and butter to him.
You're listening to music from Carry On Up the Khyber, and in here, somewhere, is the trombone of musician Bill Geldar, a jazz player who ended up working for both Eric Rodgers and Ron Goodwin. As a musician, the thing that interests me is how do you get from jazz to playing in a Carry On film?
I don't know, to be honest.
Just picked up anything that
It just seemed to be the way my life sort of panned out, you know.
Yeah.
I think my parents, when they started me, I think they thought perhaps I might be a classical musician. I was called up, and then I went in the RF Central Band, and it went on from there. But I'd already got the sort of the jazz bug by that stage.
So the jazz bug bit, and Bill went from bands like Ted Heath to Johnny Dankworth, until Bill Haley came along with his rock and roll, and sort of put jazz out of fashion. So what did they all do then?
We'd already started getting work in the studios a little bit. And of course then it snowballed. And between that and doing television and records and broadcasts, that turned out to be quite a good way of living for about 30 odd years, you know.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Jorrock, with which I would like to couple round the hall.
There was lots of things like radio shows, Rondower Ken, Round the Horn.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's Armpit Theatre.
We're a bit unpredictable what we're going to do, you know.
They sound a bit chaotic, because you were there playing live, were you?
Yeah.
With the audience, with the cast, and also there's a sound effects guy.
Yeah.
So you had to be rather good at sight reading, I guess, as well.
Oh, yeah. You got one rehearsal and that was it. There wasn't any more.
One of the best comedy gigs in town was the Carry On series, which saw Bill amongst the top brass.
Two I remember was Carry On Up the Khyber, and I think there was a jungle one as well.
Oh, yeah, wasn't it Carry On Up the Jungle?
I think it was.
Yes, they're at it again. Those crazy carry-on characters are running amok all over Africa.
What is it? Why have we stopped? See all that? Elephant. Well, I didn't think it was ours.
It's a riotous carry-on up the jungle.
So you'd go in on the day ready to record, there'd be a big screen, that's where they would run the film, and then Eric Rodgers, the composer, and he also conducted.
Also conductor.
He would actually bring you in with his baton, I guess.
Yes, that's right.
And he would have known the speeds, of course, because he would have
He'd written the
it.
music. He knew how it was supposed to fit. You just watch him, you know. Because he was watching it and we were watching him, so our backs were to the film, so we didn't actually see it. So when he went off to have a listen, we could have a peek and see what it was we'd done.
And do you think the music added to it? I mean, when you see this film on screen, you know, it's just, of course, someone, it might be Barbara Windsor just walking, bobbing along quite funnily, but when you put the music behind it, do you think to yourself, oh, I see what he's doing there, it is funny?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. You know, you think, those people are geniuses.
So why don't people write comedy scores like that today? I went along to the Century Club in Shaftesbury Avenue to meet composer Willie Dowling, who wrote this incidental music for a new comedy called Caught in the Act. It's nice, isn't it? is it funny?
I think this is an intrinsic difference between, say, the carry-on films, where the music is, for want of a better description, light and fluffy. It's just matching the comedy all the time. The significant difference in the majority of the things that I've done, which are all sort of late 1990s, that we call them the noughties, don't we? That just doesn't sit comfortably with me, but there you go, is that the instruction 99% of the time is play this for real. The comedy has to come from the dialogue and the action. My job is to just be absolutely faithful to the style, because you have to believe there's a plausibility in it in order for the comedy to really kind of work and not be farcical.
Willie's long list of TV credits include Armstrong and Miller, 2D TV, Steve Coogan, but nowadays producers seldom have enough money to pay lots of musicians. And they don't really want original music either. Most comedy music today is just parody.
There's a satisfaction in to be had doing parody music, particularly if one hasn't come across the type of music before, or performed it before, or written it before, that you're being asked to do. But it's mathematical. It's creative with limitations. It becomes painting by numbers, in effect.
When you're thinking of people playing piano for silent films, and they had to watch this thing, what they did, in some ways, was almost instinctive. You know, they had to go with the action.
But they were setting up a dialogue, weren't they? They were setting up a language for that stuff. And I think, to my mind, that's made it a little bit easier for me, because there is this vast field of frames of reference. There are certain rules that were established by those people. We know that a tremolo violin doing a minor kind of is implying fear or tension. We know that a boom on a timpani is probably somebody's breast falling out onto the counter of a bar somewhere. Do you know what I mean? It's that trite. It really is.
So you're using kind of standard rules that have already been established, because really that's what you're asked to do. But what you don't get asked to do very much, really, anymore, in modern composition for film and television, is to compose something completely new.
Very, very rarely. I mean, it does happen, but more often than not, a good director already has an idea of what the music that is going to accompany these key scenes that he has in mind.
You won't get directors asking for music like this nowadays. Ron Goodwin's innocent score for Norman Wisdom's film On the Beat. So why don't we get music like this? A question I put to the staff and students of film composition at Kingston University.
I think today's audiences might find it a little strange. I think they may find it difficult to relate to. We don't specifically focus on writing in that style.
The styles that we've been talking about that have been parodied, the very Mickey Mousey styles, you know, that was right at the beginning of sound to picture. So maybe just the compositional techniques have got more sophisticated, perhaps.
Or is it more that you can't tell the same joke over and over and over again, so you need something new to be amusing?
Does anyone here think that it's undervalued, this music? Because we tend to see, you know, Barbara Windsor's bra coming off, or Norman Wisdom falling off his bike, but the music underneath it, you know, there's quite a lot of work gone into it.
I have a third-year undergraduate module making music sound for image, and I played them some of the first Tom and Jerry cartoons, and there seemed to be a big appreciation as to how the whole action is told by orchestration and music. But of course, the composer drew on classical styles, jazz styles, and he probably even borrowed bits of, you know, music deliberately. And whereas composers today come from a different background, so if you were going to compose that kind of music, it would be, by its sort of definition, a parody. But I think there is an awful lot to learn in orchestration.
As students of film composition, if this genre came back into fashion, or someone said, look, since we've lost the whole soundtrack to Carry On Cleo, we don't know where it is, someone put it down somewhere, or it's locked in a cupboard we can't find, would you mind redoing it? Would you welcome it? Or do you think, oh, we're not trained to do that these days?
I love to. No boundaries.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be really fun to do this sort of stuff.
The masters of film knew you couldn't save a bad film with good music, but you could certainly ruin one. Who can forget Celia Johnson and Trevor Howard in Brief Encounter, A Tale of Forbidden Love, and all that Rachmaninoff music?
You all right, darling?
Yes, I'm all right.
What the Rachmaninoff music is doing, its context is everything with these things, but it's actually legitimising adultery. Brief Encounter is about a married woman and a married man who may or may not have an affair. And because you've got that lovely... Because you've got that suggestion of beauty, of romance, of purity, there's actually something very pure in that music.
Now, who would dare ruin that? Well, me, actually. With a bit of advice.
The music that would ruin Brief Encounter is he really wants her and she really wants him.
Brief Encounter. One of those typical British sex comedies where nothing happens.
You all right, darling?
Yes, I'm all right.
I wish I could think of something to say.
Doesn't matter not saying anything, I mean.
I'll miss my train and wait and see you.
No, please don't. I'll come over with you to your platform, I'd rather. Do you think we shall ever see each other again?
I don't know. Not for years, anyway. You're not angry with me, are you?
No, I'm not angry. I don't think I'm anything, really. I just feel tired.
So music can make or ruin a film. How romantic would Lawrence of Arabia have been galloping across the desert to the sound of a slide trombone? Or what if Humphrey Bogart had said, "Play it again, Sam," and he got out his kazoo? We don't hear music like this these days. Perhaps comedy composers have gone the same way as wheelwrights or blacksmiths. They exist, but there just aren't so many of them around anymore. Still, let's be grateful for what we once had. I think that's enough from me. Let's put the kettle on. More tea, Vicar?
The comedy scores were presented by Huw Williams, and the programme was produced in Cardiff by Geoff Ballinger.